The black ships did not enter space. They erased it. Where they passed, starlight vanished, as if the universe itself refused to reflect them. No gleam, no shadow, just absence, like wounds carved into reality, drifting forward with silent, deliberate intent. Entire star systems had watched them arrive. None had watched them leave. Inside the command chamber of the flagship Eternal Conquest, silence ruled with the same authority as death. The air was cold, sterile, untouched by emotion, untouched by doubt. At the center of it all stood Admiral Thorne, 8 feet of engineer perfection. His gray, battle-scarred skin told the story of 1,000 campaigns, not as memories, but as trophies. Each scar was preserved, not healed. Among the Vex, pain was not something to forget. It was something to display. He did not move unless necessary, did not speak unless required. Even his breathing was measured, efficient. Everything about the Vex was efficient. War was not chaos to them. It was mathematics. Behind him, a massive holographic projection flickered to life. A dying world. Oceans burned in slow motion. Continents fractured. Cities collapsed into dust without ceremony. Another species. Another failure. Status, Thorne said. His voice was deep, controlled, empty. A smaller Vex officer stepped forward, her movements precise, almost mechanical. Resistance eliminated, she replied. Orbital defenses neutralized. Ground populations reduced to acceptable levels. Resource extraction may begin immediately. No pride, no hesitation, just facts. Thorne watched the collapsing planet without emotion. To him, it was not destruction. It was completion. How many? He asked. Minimal losses, the officer said, within projected parameters. Of course they were. They always were. For 10,000 years, the Vex Empire had expanded across the stars, not through desperation, not through survival, but through certainty. They did not fight wars. They executed outcomes. Species rose. Species evolved. Species believed they mattered. And then the Vex arrived. Every time, the pattern remained unchanged. Discovery, assessment, eradication, assimilation. There are no exceptions. There had never been resistance that mattered. There had never been defeat. Not once in 10 millennia. Thorne turned away from the dying world. It no longer interested him. Proceed, he said. That single word sealed the fate of billions. Across the fleet, orders transmitted instantly. Massive harvesting vessels moved into position, descending upon the broken planet, like predators claiming a carcass. What remained would be stripped, its resources, its biology, its history. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was remembered. To the Vex, civilizations were not cultures. They were materials. And the universe was simply waiting to be processed. For a moment, the chamber fell into complete stillness. No alarms. No urgency. No fear. Because fear required uncertainty. And the Vex had none. Beyond the reinforced viewing glass, the Black Fleet drifted in perfect formation. Hundreds of ships, each one identical in purpose, each one part of something far greater than itself. An empire that had never been challenged. An empire that had never been questioned. An empire that had never, in all its existence, encountered something it could not understand. But that was about to change. The Vex did not conquer worlds. They processed them. Every invasion followed the same sequence, not because it was tradition, but because it was flawless. It had been refined over 10,000 years, and it had never failed. Inside the Eternal Conquest, a new holographic display unfolded before Admiral Thorne. Not a battlefield, not destruction, a system. Geometric lines of light spread across the projection, mapping the anatomy of conquest with surgical precision. Every phase, every movement, every outcome, calculated long before the first ship ever arrived. There was no randomness, only execution. Begin cycle overview, Thorne ordered. The system responded instantly. A cold, synthetic voice filled the chamber. Phase 1 detection. A distant signal. A new star system cataloged. Life identified. Phase 2 evaluation. Atmosphere analyzed. Resources measured. Species assessed. Threat level assigned. Phase 3 suppression. orbital defenses eliminated, communication networks erased, military forces neutralized, Phase 4 collapse, leadership removed, population destabilized, resistance fractured, Phase 5 conversion, viable organisms repurposed, labor forces established, planetary assets integrated into the Empire, the display dimmed, silence returned. Captain Mara stepped forward. 17 successful conquests under your command alone, she said. Efficiency has increased by 3.2% compared to previous cycles. It was the closest thing the Vex had to praise. Thorne did not react. Loss ratios, he asked. Insignificant. Of course, they always were. Among the Vex, war was not measured in victory. Victory was assumed. War was measured in waste. And waste was unacceptable. That last world, Mara continued, deviated slightly from predictive models. Hidden weapon systems increased ground resistance. Thorne's eyes narrowed slightly. A correction, he said. Not a concern. Not a threat. A correction. The system adjusted instantly, updating future invasion protocols. New variables accounted for. New responses calculated. The next species would not make the same mistake. None of them ever did. This was the true strength of the Vex. Not their weapons, not their ships, not even their numbers. It was their inability to fail twice. Every encounter refined them. Every resistance improved them. Every war made them more efficient. And efficiency, over enough time, became inevitability. Thorne moved toward the viewing glass. Below, the remains of the conquered planet were already changing. Massive extraction platforms drilled into its surface. Atmospheric processors reshaped the sky. Transport vessels carried away entire ecosystems as raw material. There was no mourning, no memory, no meaning. To the Vex, a civilization's greatest achievement was becoming useful after it died. Prepare the fleet, Thorne said. For what objective? Mara asked. For the next system. There was always a next system. Somewhere in the galaxy, another species was evolving, building cities, creating art, fighting wars they believed mattered, looking up at their stars, thinking they were alone. They were wrong. And when the Vex arrived, those species would do what all species did. They would resist. They would hope. They would fail. Because no one escaped the system. Not in 10,000 years. Not once. But far beyond the mapped territories of the Vex Empire, at the very edge of explored space, something had already been discovered. Something that did not fit the system. And for the first time in their history, the outcome was not perfectly predictable. The signal came from the edge of nothing, beyond the mapped regions of the Vex Empire, beyond systems already categorized, conquered, or scheduled for processing. There existed a narrow stretch of space marked only as unverified. It was there that the scouts found it. A single star, unremarkable, average mass, stable output, nothing worth attention. But orbiting it was something that did not belong. Display, Admiral Thorne ordered. The hologram shifted. The cold geometry of conquest vanished, replaced by a small blue-green sphere suspended in darkness. For a moment, no one spoke. It was chaotic. Cloud systems moved unpredictably across its surface. Vast oceans shimmered under reflected light. Continents stretched in uneven shapes, covered in dense, irregular growth. Nothing about it was optimized. Nothing about it was controlled. What is this? Thorne asked. Indigenous designation. Earth, came the reply. The voice belonged to intelligence officer run. He stepped forward slowly. Unlike other Vex, his movements carried a subtle hesitation, as if thought sometimes interrupted efficiency. A developing world, Wren continued. Oxygen-rich atmosphere. High biodiversity. Multiple dominant ecosystems. The display zoomed in. Cities appeared. Not uniform structures. Not efficient constructs. But sprawling, uneven clusters of light and motion. Constantly changing, constantly expanding. Population? Thorne asked. Billions. A pause. Not because the number was impressive, but because of what followed. Technological classification? Thorne continued. Wren hesitated. just for a fraction of a second. Early spacefaring, he said. They have established limited colonies beyond their home world. Primitive propulsion systems. Incomplete resource optimization. Thorne lost interest immediately. Then they're irrelevant. That should have been the end of it. It always was. Primitive species were not priorities. They were cataloged, scheduled, and eventually processed when expansion required it. But Wren did not step back. There is an anomaly, he said. Silence. Thorne turned slightly. Not fully. Just enough to acknowledge the statement. Explain. Wren expanded the display. What followed was not a static image. It was motion, time, human history. At first, it was slow. Crude tools, small settlements, creatures bound to land and survival. But then, it accelerated. The images began to shift faster. Agriculture, cities, empires rising and falling. War, always war. Industrial development began approximately 3 centuries ago, Wren said. Observe progression. The speed increased. What became steel? Steel became machines. Machines became engines. Horse-drawn transport became locomotives. Then aircraft. Then rockets. In less than a century, they left their planet. The room fell silent. Continue, Thorne said, his voice quieter now. From first power flight to orbital presence. Under 70 years. The hologram shifted again. Metal structures floated in orbit. Artificial satellites. Stations. Ships. They are inefficient, Thorne said. They are accelerating, Wren replied. Another shift. Human conflict. Massive wars. Explosions. Cities burning. Weapons evolving. They fight constantly, Wren continued. Against their environment. Against each other. That is not unusual, Thorne said. All species do this. Wren shook his head. Not like this. The display slowed. Focused. A human soldier. Injured. Bleeding. Still moving forward. Another image. A machine damaged, failing. Yet still operational, pushing beyond design limits. They persist beyond logical thresholds, Wren said. They continue even when outcomes indicate failure. Thorne's eyes narrowed. That is called inefficiency. Wren paused, then said something no Vex had said in centuries. I am not certain. The chamber grew colder. For the Vex, uncertainty was not a state. It was an error. Wren continued anyway. Their environments vary beyond optimal biological tolerance. Extreme cold, extreme heat, high radiation zones. Yet they have spread across all of them. The hologram showed deserts, frozen wastelands, dense jungles, deep oceans. They do not adapt by design, Wren said. They adapt by necessity. And, Thorne asked, Wren looked directly at the image of Earth. They improve under pressure. That was new. For 10,000 years, the Vex had faced countless species. Some strong, some intelligent, some advanced. All of them followed patterns. All of them broke under sufficient force. But this one, this species calls itself human, Wren said. Thorne studied the planet again. This time, he did not dismiss it immediately. Threat level, he asked. Wren hesitated, then answered carefully. Currently minimal. A pause. But long-term. For the first time in this entire encounter, Wren did not complete the sentence. Thorne turned away. Decision made. Prepare standard conquest protocol, he said. Assign it to a secondary fleet. To him, this was routine. Just another world. Just another species. But as the hologram faded, Wren remained where he stood, still watching the place called Earth, because something about it felt wrong. Not weak, not primitive, but unpredictable. And for the first time in Vex history, the system had encountered something it did not fully understand. The decision was made in less than 3 seconds. To the Vex, that was more than enough time. Standard conquest protocol, Admiral Thorne repeated. No emphasis, no hesitation, just conclusion. Around him, the command chamber responded instantly. Orders flowed to the fleet like a pulse. Precise, synchronized, unquestioned. A new world had been assigned its place in the system. Earth. A sign of forward attachment, Thorne continued. Minimal force. This species does not warrant escalation. Captain Mara inclined her head slightly. It will be done. That should have been the end of it. Another routine operation. Another inevitable outcome. But Wren did not move. The silence stretched just slightly longer than acceptable. Thorne noticed. You have additional input, he said. It was not a question. Wren stepped forward. Carefully. Measured. But not entirely without tension. Yes, Admiral. Every Vex in the chamber registered the deviation. Lower-ranking officers did not challenge command decisions. Not after they were made. Not ever. Speak, Thorne said. Wren gestured, and the hologram of Earth reappeared. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was violent. War footage. Human conflicts across centuries. Explosions. Chaos. Collapse. Cities reduced to ash and then rebuilt. They should have destroyed themselves, Wren said. No one responded. Based on their level of internal conflict, he continued, this species has experienced enough self-inflicted damage to collapse multiple times over. Thorne watched without interest. Yet they did not, he said. No, Wren replied, and that is the anomaly. The images shifted faster. War. Recovery. War again. Stronger weapons. Faster rebuilding. They do not learn to avoid conflict, Wren said. They learn to survive it. That was not efficient. That was something else. They escalate, Wren continued. Every failure becomes a foundation for improvement. Thorne's expression did not change. All species adapt, he said. Wren shook his head. Not like this. The hologram zoomed in again. A damaged human spacecraft. Systems failing. Hull breached. And yet, it continued moving. Human systems operate beyond optimal limits, Wren said. They push technology past intended capacity. They improvise under pressure. They make decisions that prioritize outcome over preservation. Meaning, Thorne asked. Wren paused. This time longer. They are willing to lose in order to win. That sentence lingered in the air. For the Vex, it made no sense. Loss was inefficiency. Loss was failure. Loss was avoided at all costs. But here, they sacrifice assets deliberately, Wren said, sometimes even themselves. A subtle shift moved through the chamber. Not fear, not yet, but something close to discomfort. Thorne finally turned fully toward Wren. You are suggesting, he said slowly, that a primitive species poses a strategic complication. Wren did not lower his gaze. I am suggesting, he replied, that our standard approach may not be optimal. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. For 10,000 years, the Vex had followed the same system. Because it worked. Because it always worked. To question it was to question the foundation of the Empire itself. Thorne stepped closer, towering, silent for a moment. Then, no, one word, absolute. They are primitive, Thorne continued. They are divided, undisciplined, inefficient. He gestured toward the chaotic imagery of human history. This is not strength, he said. It is disorder. Wren held his position. It may be both, he said quietly. That was the closest thing to defiance the Vex allowed. Thorne studied him. For a moment, there was something behind his gaze. Not doubt, not yet, but irritation. You are an intelligence officer, Thorne said. Your function is analysis, not speculation. Wren lowered his head slightly, but did not retract his statement. Of course, Admiral. Thorne turned away. Discussion over. Deploy the scouts, he ordered. Initial contact will follow standard intimidation protocol, which meant disable communication, demonstrate superiority, force surrender. It had worked on every species, without exception. It will be enough, Thorne said, but Wren did not respond, because for the first time, he was no longer certain that it would be. As the order spread across the fleet, smaller vessels broke formation, sleek, black shapes slipping into faster-than-light trajectories toward the distant blue planet. Earth did not know it yet, but first contact had already begun, and it would not follow the system, because the system had never been tested against something that refused to behave. And somewhere, deep within the logic of the Vex Empire, A flaw had just been ignored. A flaw that would soon become impossible to control. The human outpost on Mars was never meant to be a battlefield. It was small, fragile, temporary, a cluster of domes pressed against a dead world. Thin walls separating life from vacuum. Fewer than 50,000 inhabitants. Scientists, engineers, workers, not soldiers. Which made it perfect. The Vex scout ships arrived without warning. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They simply appeared, sliding into orbit like shadows cutting through light. On the surface, alarms began to scream. Inside the Mars Defense Command, Captain Elias Reed stood motionless, staring at the tactical display. 6 unidentified vessels. No transponder signals. No recognizable energy signatures. "Try hailing them again," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, but tight. "We transmitted on all frequencies," Lieutenant Park replied. No response. Reed nodded slowly. First contact protocols were clear. Attempt communication. Show peaceful intent. Avoid escalation. But there was another rule. One humanity had learned the hard way. Never appear weak. "Send again," Reed said. "This time, make it clear this is restricted space." Park complied. The message transmitted into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, 2 of Mars' communications satellites exploded. No warning. No visible projectile. Just sudden, silent destruction. "They've fired," Park shouted. Reed's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "All right," he said quietly. "So that's how this begins." He turned to the crew. "Sound general quarters. Launch defense squadrons. Notify Earth Command. We have hostile first contact." Across the station, alarms shifted tone. From warning to war. Outside, the human fleet moved into position. 20 ships, lightly armed, designed for patrol, not combat. Against them, 6 Vex vessels. Silent, unmoving, watching. Commander Shaw of the Vex Scouts observed the human response with mild curiosity. "They are mobilizing," his officer noted. "Predictable," Shaw replied. He studied the incoming ships. Primitive construction, visible seams, inefficient propulsion. "They will attempt resistance," he said, "and then surrender." That was how it always happened. "Disable their remaining communications," Shaw ordered. The Vex ships fired again. More satellites vanished. The humans kept coming. Closer now. Faster. Shaw tilted his head slightly. "Strange," he murmured. "They are not maintaining distance." On the human flagship Defiant, Reed watched the enemy ships grow larger on the screen. Too large, too smooth, too wrong. "Range?" he asked. "Closing fast," Park replied. Reed exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "Execute maneuver Thermopylae." A pause. Some of the crew glanced at him. They understood what that meant. No retreat. "Sir," Park hesitated. Reed met her eyes. "If they wanted peace," he said, "they would have answered." That was enough. The fleet shifted formation. From defensive to aggressive. Shaw noticed immediately. "They are dividing their forces," his officer said. "Incorrect," Shaw replied. "They are disorganizing." The human ships split into 3 groups, each one targeting a different Vex vessel. "Tactically inefficient," Shaw said. "Our shields will absorb." He stopped because the humans didn't fire. They accelerated, straight toward them. "Collision course," the officer said. Shaw frowned. No species would. Impact. 3 human ships slammed into a Vex scout vessel. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then their reactors detonated. A wave of electromagnetic force exploded outward, crashing into the Vex ship. Its shields flickered, collapsed. Shaw's eyes widened. Impossible. Before he could finish, the second wave hit. Missiles, kinetic rounds, energy bursts. Primitive, crude, but now unopposed. The Vex ship tore apart under barrage. And then it exploded. Silence filled the void. For the first time in over 2,000 years, a Vex vessel had been destroyed in a first contact scenario. On the bridge, Shaw didn't move. He simply stared at the empty space where his ship had been. His officer whispered, they sacrificed themselves. The word felt foreign. Wrong. Shaw's voice came out slower than before. Why? No one answered, because there was no logical answer. On the human side, Reed watched the explosion. His jaw tightened. Direct hit confirmed. Park said, losses. Reed asked, 17 ships gone. A pause. Reed closed his eyes briefly. 17 ships. 17 crews. Gone. And yet, we got one, he said. No celebration. No relief. Just acknowledgement. Reform the line, he ordered. The remaining ships moved again. Still outnumbered. Still outgunned. Still advancing. Back on the Vex command channel, Shaw finally spoke. All vessels, full combat protocol. His voice had changed. Not fear, but something close to it. Destroy all human ships. The battle that followed was short. Brutal. The Vex won. But not cleanly. Not perfectly. When it ended, 5 Vex ships were gone. Destroyed. By a species that should not have been capable of touching them. As Shaw's damaged vessel retreated, he prepared his report, but the words would not come easily, because there was no category for what had just happened. No precedent. No model. No explanation. Only one undeniable truth. The system had just failed. And far away, aboard the Eternal Conquest, Admiral Thorne was about to read the first report in Vex history. That contained something impossible. Loss. Admiral Thorne read the report 3 times. Not because he did not understand it, but because he refused to accept it. 5 ships lost. To primitives. The words felt incorrect, as if the system itself had made an error. Replay the engagement, he said. The bridge darkened. The battle unfolded again in perfect detail. Human ships accelerating, breaking formation, colliding, detonating. Thorne watched every second, every angle, every movement. Not once did his expression change, but something behind it did. They are wasting resources, Captain Mara said. Yes, Thorne replied. A pause. But they are achieving results. That was new. He turned toward the command crew. Prepare full fleet deployment, he ordered. Not a scout force, not a detachment, an invasion. If they resist, he continued, we will remove their ability to do so. Across the void, the Vex fleet advanced. Hundreds of ships. A wall of darkness moving toward Mars. On the surface below, Colonel Emma Adams watched it happen. The sky disappeared. Not metaphorically. Literally. Hundreds of black vessels blocked out the stars. For a moment, even the most hardened soldiers fell silent. Status, Adams said. Evacuation at 80%. Major West replied. Defense systems online. Missile batteries ready. Minefields active. Adams nodded. Good. She looked back at the sky. They came faster than expected. They always do, West said quietly. Adams checked her weapon. An old habit. One she had never quite lost. Then we make them pay faster, she replied. Above them, the Vex began their descent. Dropships cut through the thin Martian atmosphere like falling blades. Hundreds of them, each carrying heavily armored Vex warriors. Perfect formation. Perfect timing. Perfect execution. Just like every other invasion. And just like every other invasion, they expected it to work. Fire, Adams said. The surface of Mars answered. Missiles erupted from hidden silos across the planet. Hundreds of them, each one locked onto a descending target. The Vex ships reacted instantly. Evasive maneuvers. Formation adjustments. Precise. Efficient. But the missiles did not miss. They're tracking us, a Vex pilot reported. Impossible, came the response. No system should be able to... Explosion. One dropship vanished. Then another. Then 10 more. The sky filled with fire. On Eternal Conquest, Thorne leaned forward slightly. How are they achieving, Locke? He demanded. Captain Mara scanned the data. They're not using automated targeting, she said. Thorne's eyes narrowed. Explain. Mara hesitated. Each missile is being guided manually. Silence. No organic pilot can react at that speed, Thorne said. Correct, Mara replied. Another explosion lit the display. Then how? He asked. Mara looked at the data again. They've trained for this, she said. They're predicting our movements. Thorne didn't respond immediately, because that meant something far worse than advanced technology. It meant preparation. The humans had expected them. On Mars, the second wave adjusted. Lower altitude, faster descent, avoiding missile arcs. They're learning, Wes said. Adams nodded. So do we? Activate the minefield. The ground erupted. Hidden explosives detonated across miles of terrain, turning the Martian surface into a wall of fire and debris. Vex ships flew straight into it. More losses, more disruption. But this time, some made it through. Heavy armored warriors hit the ground, 8 feet tall, weapons glowing with contained plasma. Unstoppable. Or at least, they should have been. Engage, Adams ordered. The ground itself came alive. Explosions from below. Hidden charges. Traps triggered in sequence. Vex formations broke. Ambush, their commander roared. But the enemy was not visible. Not yet. Small machines burst from the soil, fast, erratic, carrying explosive payloads. The Vex opened fire, destroying many, but not all. Some reached their targets, detonated, creating openings. And then the humans appeared, from underground tunnels, from hidden bunkers, from places the Vex had already scanned and cleared. They didn't fight head-on. They struck, then disappeared, then struck again. Different angles, different timing, different tactics. This is not organized warfare, a Vex officer reported. It is chaos. No, the commander replied, watching his forces collapse piece by piece. This is strategy. On the battlefield, Vex superiority meant less with every passing minute. Their strength relied on control, predictability, dominance. The humans offered none of it. They fought like something that refused to follow rules, because to them, there were no rules. Back on the command ship, Thorne watched the reports flood in. Losses, delays, unexpected resistance. 3 hours. 3 hours against a primitive colony. And it was still standing. His grip tightened. This ends now, he said. Double the landing force. Captain Mara hesitated. Admiral, at this rate, losses will continue to increase. I don't care, Thorne said. That, more than anything else, was the first real sign of change. The Vex did not ignore efficiency. But now, he was, because this was no longer just a conquest. It was a challenge, and challenges were not something the Vex understood how to lose. On Mars, Colonel Adams checked the latest report. 40% casualties. Vex forces still advancing. Time running out. But she smiled slightly, because the objective was never to win, only to hold, only to bleed them, only to prove one thing. They can be hurt. Above them, the Vex fleet darkened the sky, but for the first time, they were not in complete control, and that terrified them more than any weapon ever could. The war room beneath Geneva had no windows, no sunlight, no sense of time, only screens, data, and the quiet weight of extinction. General Elena Hayes stood at the center of it all, staring at the holographic projection of Mars. Red surface, burning impact zones, fading signals. We lost another sector, someone said. Hayes didn't turn. How long did they hold? She asked. 37 minutes. She nodded. Longer than predicted. That was how humanity measured progress now, not victories. Time. Every minute gained was another minute to learn, and learning was the only way they were still alive. Begin analysis, Hayes said. The room shifted instantly. Data streams filled the air. Enemy ship movements, weapon signatures, shield fluctuations, patterns. Dr. Aaron Wilson stepped forward. "We've confirmed it," he said. Hayes finally turned. "Confirmed what?" Wilson gestured to the display. A Vex ship rotated slowly in the hologram. Highlighted sections pulsed with light. "Their technology isn't fundamentally superior," he said. Silence. That was not what anyone expected to hear. "It's refined," Wilson continued. Optimized, perfected over time. But, Hayes asked. Wilson looked directly at her. It's predictable. The room stilled. He expanded the model. Their shields operate on fixed frequency cycles. Their weapons follow consistent output patterns. Their formations are mathematically efficient, but rigid. Another shift. Human attack data overlaid onto Vex movements. They don't improvise, Wilson said. They execute. Hayes narrowed her eyes. And when execution fails? Wilson didn't hesitate. They repeat it harder. A quiet realization spread through the room. They've never had to adapt, Hayes said. No, Wilson replied. They've never needed to. That was the difference. The Vex had perfected war. Humans had survived it, and survival required something different. Show me the weaknesses, Hayes said. Wilson highlighted sections of the ship. Shield harmonics can be disrupted. Communication channels can be jammed. Their response time drops when multiple variables are introduced simultaneously. He paused, and most importantly, the display zoomed out. Vex fleet formations appeared. Perfect lines, perfect spacing, perfect coordination. They think like conquerors, Wilson said. Hayes tilted her head slightly. Explain. They expect fear, he said. They expect surrender. Their entire system is built around overwhelming force. Another overlay appeared. Human tactics. Messy, unpredictable. When those expectations fail, Wilson continued, they don't adapt fast enough. Hayes looked back at Mars. Burning, bleeding, still fighting. So we don't fight their war, she said. Wilson nodded. We make them fight ours. A new silence settled in the room. Not fear this time. Something sharper. Intent. Colonel Reeves stepped forward. We've been working on something, she said. A new hologram appeared. Small ships. Different from standard human designs. Sleeker. Modified. Captured Vex tech. Reeves explained. Integrated into our systems. Hayes raised an eyebrow. How stable? Not very, Reeves admitted. A few quiet chuckles. Dark humor. The only kind left. But effective, she added. The display shifted again. Simulations. Human ships slipping past Vex detection. Boarding actions. Explosion from within. Infiltration, Hayes said. Reeves nodded. They don't defend their ships properly. They've never had to. Of course they hadn't. Why would they? No one had ever gotten that far. Until now. It's a suicide mission, someone said. Reeves didn't argue. Most of our plans are, she replied. Silence again. But no one objected, because everyone already understood. This wasn't about winning. Not yet. It was about making the cost unacceptable. Hayes stepped forward. How long until deployment? She asked. Prototype is ready, Reeves said. Full implementation weeks. Hayes shook her head. We don't have weeks. She looked around the room. We have days. Another display activated. A massive Vex fleet, larger than anything they had seen before. Reinforcements, Wilson said quietly. Hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. They're escalating, someone whispered. Hayes nodded. So are we. She turned back to the team. From this point forward, she said, we stop reacting. A pause. We start thinking. Her gaze hardened. Every battle, every loss, every second. We use it. She pointed to the Vex fleet. They think this is a conquest. Then to Earth. We make a mistake. No one spoke, because for the first time, humanity had something it hadn't had at the start of this war. Not hope, not courage. Something far more dangerous. Understanding. And once humans understood something, they didn't just survive it. They turned it into a weapon. Far above, beyond Mars, the Vex fleet continued its advance, unaware that the war had just changed, not on the battlefield, but in the minds of the enemy. And that was where humans were strongest. 3 years. That was how long it took. 3 years of losing. 3 years of bleeding. 3 years of learning. And now, the war looked different. Admiral Thorne could feel it before he saw it. The pattern had changed. Report, he demanded. Captain Mara stepped forward. Engagement near Jupiter, she said. Mining stations on the outer moons. Routine. It should have been routine. Outcome. Thorne asked. Mara hesitated. Unresolved. That word again. It had become far too common. Thorne turned to display. Jupiter filled the screen. Massive. Unmoving. And around it, chaos. Vex ships maneuvering aggressively. Firing in all directions. At nothing. Where's the enemy? Thorne snapped. They're using the radiation belts. Mara said. As if on cue, human ships appeared. Fast. Sharp. Precise. They struck. A Vex cruiser exploded. Then another. And just as quickly, they vanished. Back into the storm. They're hiding, a Vex officer said. No, Thorne replied, watching closely. They're choosing when to be seen. That was worse. Far worse. Because that meant control. They've changed their ships, Mara added. The display zoomed in. Human vessels, sleeker now. Faster. Different. Shield signatures? Thorne asked. Mara's voice dropped slightly. Similar to ours. Silence. Explain. Before she could, Wren stepped forward. They've adapted our technology, he said. Not fear, not uncertainty. Certainty. They've studied it, improved it, and deployed it. Thorne's jaw tightened. Impossible. Wren didn't argue. He simply activated another feed. A new ship entered the battlefield. Larger than any human vessel before. Twice the size. Its hull absorbed light. Just like Vex ships. What is that? Thorne whispered. Human flagship, Wren said. A name appeared on the screen. Defiance. The ship moved forward. Not cautiously. Not defensively. Directly into the Vex fleet. Destroy it. Thorne ordered immediately. Weapons fired. Beams of energy. Plasma torpedoes. All converging. And then, nothing. The attacks vanished. Absorbed. Shields holding, Mara said, disbelief creeping into her voice. Return fire, Thorne snapped. The Defiance responded. A single beam. Clean. Precise. It cut through a Vex cruiser. Like it wasn't there. Explosion. Another shot. Another ship gone. Impossible, someone whispered. Thorne didn't speak, because for the first time in his life, he didn't have an answer. They didn't just copy us, Wren said quietly. They surpassed us. Alarms suddenly screamed across the bridge. Multiple breaches, an officer shouted. Boarding signatures detected. Thorne's head snapped up. Boarding. That word didn't belong. Not here. Not on a Vex ship. Internal sensors confirm. The sentence never finished, because the doors exploded inward. Smoke. Debris. Silence. And then, humans. Armored. Focused. Unafraid. Weapons raised. The bridge froze. No one moved, because this had never happened before. Not in 10,000 years. A single human stepped forward, removed his helmet. Calm. Controlled. Admiral Thorne, he said. My name is Commander Alex. His voice carried no fear, no hesitation, only certainty. Your ship is now under our control. No threats, no shouting, just a statement. Thorne stared at him, trying to understand what he was seeing. You expect me to surrender? He said. Alex shook his head slightly. If we wanted you dead, he replied, you'd already be dead. A pause. We're here to talk. That hit harder than any weapon, because it made no sense. You attack us, Thorne said slowly. You steal our technology. You bore my ship. His voice dropped. And now you want peace? Alex met his gaze. We want an end. Wren stepped forward quietly. Admiral, he said. Thorne didn't look at him. I've studied them, Wren continued. Still calm. Still controlled. Their strength isn't their weapons. A glance at Alex. It's their ability to change. Thorne's silence stretched, because now he could see it. 3 years ago, they were primitives. Now, they stood on his bridge. Equal, or worse. Think about it, Wren said. In 3 years, they've reached this level. A pause. What will they be in 10? The question lingered. Heavy, unavoidable. For the first time, Admiral Thorne wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about the future. And in that future, the Vex were no longer at the top. The balance had shifted, not gradually, not subtly, completely, and standing in front of him was the proof. A species that didn't just survive war, but evolved through it. And now, they weren't defending anymore. They were deciding how it would end. The bridge of eternal conquest was silent, not the silence of control, the silence of something breaking. Admiral Thorne stood motionless, not because he was restrained, but because, for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. In front of him stood Commander Alex, a human, a species that should have been conquered in days, now standing on his flagship as an equal, or worse, a negotiator. "You've seen what we can do," Alex said calmly. "No arrogance, no fear, just truth." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Yes," he replied, "and you've proven yourselves dangerous." The word tasted strange, because danger was something the Vex were, not something they faced. Alex nodded slightly. "Good," he said. "Then we can stop pretending." A pause. "This isn't a conquest anymore." Thorne's voice hardened. "It never stopped being one." Alex shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "It just stopped being yours." That landed. Hard. The Vex officers shifted uneasily, because they felt it too. Not defeat. Something worse. Uncertainty. "For 10,000 years," Thorne said, "the Vex have brought order to the galaxy." Alex almost smiled. "Is that what you call it?" Thorne didn't respond, because the question wasn't meant to be answered. It was meant to be felt. Alex stepped closer. "Let me ask you something, Admiral," he said. "When you conquer a world, what happens next?" Thorne answered immediately. "It becomes part of the Empire." "And the people?" Alex asked. "They serve. And if they resist, they're eliminated." Simple, logical, efficient. Alex nodded slowly. "And you've never questioned that?" Thorne's eyes hardened. "It is the natural order." There it was. The belief that built an empire. Alex looked around the bridge, at the weapons, at the crew, at the power, then back at Thorne. "No," he said quietly. "It's just the only way you've ever known." Silence, because that was different. Subtle, but devastating. Thorne felt it. A crack in something ancient. "You think your way is better?" he asked. Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the viewport. "Look," he said. Reluctantly, Thorne did. Outside, the battle had slowed. Ships drifting. Fires fading. A war pausing. "We don't fight because we're stronger," Alex said. "We fight because we have something worth protecting." Thorne said nothing. "Your empire is built on fear," Alex continued. "Ours is built on choice." That word again. Choice. The thing the Vex never needed, never understood. "You call it weakness," Alex said, "but it's the only reason we're still here." A long silence followed, because Thorne was thinking, really thinking, not calculating, not commanding, questioning, something no Vex admiral had done in centuries. "You sacrifice yourselves," he said slowly. "Yes," Alex replied. "Why?" The question wasn't mocking. It was genuine, and that made it heavier. Alex met his eyes. "Because some things matter more than survival." That made no sense. And yet, everything Thorne had seen over the past 3 years said otherwise. Humans should have been extinct, but they weren't, because they didn't fight like survivors. They fought like believers. "In your mind," Alex continued, "strength means domination." He stepped closer. "In ours, it means endurance." Thorne's gaze shifted slightly, because that word, endurance, he had seen it on Mars, in space, on his own ship, a species that refused to stop, refused to break, refused to disappear. "No species has ever resisted us like this," Thorne admitted. Alex nodded. "I know." Not proud, not boastful, just aware. "And they never will again," he added quietly. That was the moment, the shift, because this wasn't negotiation anymore. It was a realization. Thorne looked around his bridge, his empire, his power, his certainty. And for the first time, He saw its limits. "You're asking me to abandon everything," he said. Alex shook his head. "No." A pause. "I'm asking you to evolve." That word hit differently, because evolution was something the Vex had forgotten. They had perfected themselves and stopped changing. Humans never stopped. That was the difference. That was why they were winning. Not because they were stronger, but because they refused to stay the same. "What are your terms?" Thorn asked finally, not as a conqueror, but as something else. Something new. Alex didn't hesitate. "Cease expansion. Withdraw your fleets. Recognize human sovereignty." Simple, direct, unavoidable. "And in return?" Thorn asked. Alex held his gaze. "We don't finish this war." Silence. Because both of them understood what that meant. Humanity could continue, and eventually they would win. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. Thorn exhaled slowly. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Vex Empire faced a truth it couldn't conquer. Some enemies didn't need to defeat you. They just needed to outgrow you. And humanity already had. 6 months later, Earth was quiet, not silent, alive. Children laughed in open parks. Birds crossed blue skies. Cities breathed again. War still existed. But not here. Not now. Admiral Thorn stood beneath the sky he had once intended to conquer. Now, he simply watched it. It felt strange. No tactical displays. No fleet reports. No calculations of destruction. Just clouds. Movement without purpose. Or perhaps purpose he had never understood. "You're doing it again." Thorn didn't turn. "I am observing," he replied. "Commander Alex," now Ambassador Alex, stepped beside him. "You've been observing for 20 minutes, Alex said. A faint hint of humor. Another human trait. Thorn considered that. "On my world," he said slowly, "nothing exists without function." Alex nodded. "And here?" Thorn looked at the sky again. "I am beginning to suspect that is the function." Alex smiled slightly. "Welcome to humanity." A group of children ran past them. Loud, careless, alive. Thorn's posture stiffened slightly. Still unfamiliar. Still unpredictable. One of them stopped. A small child, looking up at him. Not with fear, with curiosity. That, more than anything else, was unsettling. The child stepped closer, holding something. A piece of paper. Rough. Hand-drawn. They held it up. "For you," the child said, then ran back without waiting. Thorn looked down at it. A drawing. 2 ships. 1 Vex. 1 human. Not firing. Flying side by side. He stared at it longer than he expected. "You don't understand it," Alex said quietly. Thorn shook his head. "No," he admitted. A pause. "But I want to." That was new. Want. The Vex didn't want. They took. They commanded. They conquered. But this was different. Across Earth, similar moments were happening. Vex envoys walking among humans. Human engineers studying Vex technology. Joint councils forming. Not trust. Not yet. But something close. Something possible. The war hadn't ended because one side was destroyed. It ended because one side changed. And the other chose to understand. Far beyond Earth, Vex fleets withdrew, not in defeat, but in something far more difficult. Restraint. Some resisted. Some questioned. An empire built on certainty does not shift easily. But the change had begun. And once change begins, it cannot be stopped. Thorn folded the drawing carefully. Precise. Controlled. Then placed it inside his uniform. Close. A strange decision, but one he didn't question. "Do you regret it?" Alex asked. Thorn considered the question. The wars. The conquests. The centuries of dominance. Then he looked at the children again. At the sky. At a world that had refused to fall. "No," he said. A pause. "But I am beginning to question it." Alex nodded. "That's where it starts." They stood there in silence. Not as enemies. Not fully as allies. But as something new. 2 species that had nearly destroyed each other. Now standing side by side. trying to build something instead. Your empire has lasted 10,000 years, Alex said. Thorn nodded. Yes. Alex looked up at the sky. Imagine what we could build together. A long silence followed, because for the first time, Thorn wasn't thinking about conquest. He was thinking about the future. And in that future, strength wasn't measured by how many worlds you took, but by what you created. Together, the universe hadn't changed. It was still vast, still dangerous, still full of unknowns. But one thing was different. For the first time, the Vex were not the most dangerous force in it. And that realization did not bring fear. It brought something else. Possibility.